Come on, second topic. With the continuation of the German invasion towards the Soviet Union. So I'm talking about the Second World War. Uh, the German invasion began on 22nd, 1941, 1941, 22nd June 1941, without a formal declaration of war. The German tanks, supported by air attacks, tanks was roaming on the land, and above this is the war tactics, the aircraft flying over that to cover the tanks movement and the troops movement. Okay, so this was the way the German tanks, supported by the air attacks, rapidly advanced into the Soviet Union because Stalin was not prepared for to repel that. Along a front which stretched more than 3,000 kilometers towards the Leningrad, Moscow, and Kiev. The Soviet forces readily retreated, and the German forces occupied Kiev, Smolensk, Odessa. Germany had hoped to end the war with the Soviet Union before the onset of the winter. In early October, Moscow was besieged. October 1941 onwards. By then, however, it was too late. Okay, soon the German winter, soon the Russian winter started. After October, November, December, the freezing of the climate is very difficult to stand. By the middle of the November, the assault on Moscow had been halted. By the end of November, the temperature had fallen to minus 40 degrees Celsius, rendering much of the Germans' heavy equipment useless because the equipment was not made for that temperature to sustain. The German soldiers were not sufficiently clothed to withstand the winter. In November, the Soviet counter-attack started. Sorry, in December, counter-attack started by the Soviets, and by January, the German forces were drawn back from Moscow. Operation Barbarossa had failed, but the total route was to come later. In the meantime, many other significant developments had taken place in the world because in colonial territories there was also fighting going on by these states, by these powers, because there was many colonies colonized by these powers. If they were fighting in Europe, then their war spill over to the territories of they had occupied as a colonial states. So that is also become very different kind of thing. But focus on the US entry into the war. then the picture becomes difficult because German and the Italian and its conglomerates, many more countries, were so strong that neither can nobody can stop them. So Japan was also in the East and Pacific, South Asia. He had all occupied with a stronghold. German in the uh, Europe, and there was very little powers. Some countries were who was operating, very few was that in the eastern side, Japan, and the Europe side, the UK, United Kingdom, and the uh, German and the Soviet Union, and Italy was German France, and the United States was the. These five and six countries was actually the main player of the system. Rest all the were the sufferers. They become the subjugation of these countries, other nations. So the US entry actually changed the course of the war. So that's uh, because uh, when the Second World War broke out, the US announced her neutrality. US firstly said that I'm not going to be with anybody, is not going to participate in the war. That's a clear statement they made. Since the beginning of the aggression by the fascist forces means the Italian forces and German forces, and you can say that Japan as well. Japan has uh, done many brutal acts in the uh, South Korea. South Korean women, they used as a pleasure element to them. That is very uh, disturbing thing. Yeah, the US had followed a policy similar to that of Britain and France uh, during the Munich talks on Sudetenland. Sudetenland. I don't know where the Sudetenland. It may be Sudan. It may be. I don't know. Uh, or maybe the place of Munich called France in France. I think. I don't know. But the talk that happened there, the U.S. president had supported Chamberlain's policy of appeasement. The US had protested against the Japanese aggression in China, but did nothing to prevent it. Protested against the Japanese aggression in China, but they didn't even to prevent such kind of actions to happen. Most Americans were sympathetic to Britain in the war, but were opposed to directly US entry into the war. Britain was allowed to buy arms on what is known as the cash and carry basis. Cash and carry basis, okay, from the US. US was pumping the arms, you know. This guy, the US, United States of America, pumping the weapon everywhere in the world, but he is not willing to participate in to the war. That's a very clever thing they did in past and they are doing in present. Gradually, the US support to Britain grew. By early 1941, the British were no position to pay for the arms and other goods for which they were heavily dependent on the US. In March 1941, the US Congress passed a law under which the US president was given the right to lend or lease armaments to any countries whose defense was vital to the defense of the United States. Okay, whose defense is vital to the defense of United States, they are still doing the very same thing. They have picked for India right now to contain the China. Very same thing is going on this time as well. They are giving their arms to India. They are giving arms to the Taiwan. They are feeling tightly with the Philippines in the South China Sea to contain the China's movement. So that's the very same feeling they are drawing, and you can see into the history as well. U.S. policy. That same thing is doing it right now. The vital to the defense of the United States. This was known as the Lend-Lease system. The Britain began to receive massive supplies of the US weapons. Subsequently, US also undertook the protection of her shipments to Britain against German attacks. Subsequently, the US industries began producing enormous quantities of the armament, aircrafts, and ships. In November 1941, the US Lend-Lease system was extended to the Soviet Union as well. So the topic comes into again the place the Atlantic Charter. Another important declaration was a declaration which the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill was there and the US President Roosevelt. He had been elected president for the third time in 1940. Issued after a meeting in August 1941, this is known as the Atlantic Charter. This was an important document even though it did not imply any direct military commitment on the parts of the US to any parts of the world. Okay. So the charter set out certain common principles for constructing a better future for the world. I'm not saying in to my conscience that they were willing to make the better future for the world, but their charter is saying that this statement, it not from my side. I would say that they wanted to ruin the system of the world. But what comes out of this war is freedom of the states. That's a very nice thing, thanks to this war. Otherwise, the colonial countries would never become free. Thanks to this war, because of this, they become free. They get the opportunity to become free. The two countries committed themselves to these principles, and they became, in a sense, a statement of our aims. Both Britain and USA declared that they do not seek aggrandizement, territorial or other, or any territorial changes which do not accord with the freely expressed wishes of the people concerned. The charter also stated that the two countries respect the rights of all peoples to choose the form of government under which they will live. They wish to see sovereign states and self-government restored to those who had been forcibly deprived of them. The charter also called for a final destruction of the Nazi tyranny. Later, the Soviet Union also became a part of the Atlantic Charter. Ironically, when the leader from the India represented their demand for the independence from Britain, the quoted the principles set out by the Atlantic Charter, the Winston Churchill, the Winston Churchill rebuffed them, saying that those principles were applicable only to countries who were under the German occupation. Okay? How they circumvent their principles. The very same thing right now is Vladimir Putin saying that the Western countries making their international rule-based order, but they are circumventing according to their comforts. Okay, so that's the very same thing happening from the past. They have made the Atlantic Charter, and in this charter, saying that the countries will have whatever the government, their people want, they can opt that. But when India, because of the was colonial occupation under, wanted to uh, this charter to apply to Indian territory as well. So what the Mr. Churchill saying that this is no, it's not for you. It's for the territory which occupied by the Germans. No, it's not for you, Indians. It is only for those regions who is occupied by the Germans will be applicable this kind of Atlantic Charter. So that's the double standards they always doing. That's thanks. Next, I will discuss the attack of the Pearl Harbor by the USA. Okay.